Well, thank you. Well, I should mention first that this escapade I'm going to report to you had a certain epic ambition attached to it because the school in question was way out in the bush in what is now Zimbabwe. It was then Rhodesia. It's about 30 miles from the nearest town. I was 13 at the time, and my parents lived about 2,000 miles away up in the north in another country, and the aim was to get back to them. And so there was a certain ambition to the project, which, as you'll see, what wasn't quite realized in the outcome. But in order to explain why I ran away from this school, I have to start a little bit earlier and tell you that I was born in Africa, in what is now Zambia, right on the border of the Congo, in a place called Luanshya, which means the Valley of Death. So it was a propitious start right from the beginning. My mother loathed Africa. She was terrified of it. She hated the snakes and the scorpions and everything. But she was so keen on having all the servants that we had that it sort of trumped these anxieties. And she stayed there and had a comfortable time in that respect anyway. And I was rather brought up by these servants. I had a very nice nanny called Besta, and our head servant was a chap called Johnny Penza, who was our cook, and he used to sleep on the floor next to my bed when I had night terrors, which was pretty well every night. And I didn't see my parents very much, so rather remote and distant characters. And they also had a very bad habit of not explaining things properly. So when they took me to prep school when I was 7, they didn't tell me after they left me there that they were coming back for me. So I thought that was it, and I didn't expect to see them again after that. And in fact, it was rather a surprise when they went off to America, and they came back about 6 months later, and I was quite surprised to see them. Well, at the age of 12, they sent me to this school in Rhodesia, as it then was. And the school still exists. It's called Falcon College. Any alumni of Falcon College here? And it was situated in an old mine, and we all had to be very careful about not falling down the shafts, although actually the danger of being thrown down the shafts by irate masters and prefects was much more a danger than falling into one by accident. And I was in the house of a man called Montgomery Woolley, who I wish was still alive so that I could do him an injury of some kind, because he made my life an absolute misery. Partly because I was, anyway, rather a cheeky little boy, and also a rather distracted one because I like to read, and also a slightly untidy one, and also one who really didn't understand most of the awfully stupid rules that the school had all the time. So I was forever in trouble. And trouble at the school meant being beaten, being caned. And I had the record for the number of times that I was caned, not just in my house, but in the school. And it got to a point where I had so many bruises and blood blisters and things on my backside that because I had to go for another beating one evening, and it was all very gentlemanly because we used to have to dress for dinner at this school and put on our flannels and our tie and blazer, and then we went for our beatings after dinner at night. So we had the whole day to contemplate it, but at least we had the thickness of the flannel normally. But on this occasion, because my backside was in such a terrible state, I put a magazine down the back of my flannels, and I went off and I got a caning, and it didn't hurt at all. And when I got back to my dormitory, alas, turned out that my dormitory prefect, a very nice man called Huggins, nicknamed Bugs Huggins, and his window of his study was just across a little lawn from the housemaster's study window. And as I came into the dormitory, he came out of his study and he said, "Was that you who just had that beating?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "It sounded very strange." And I said, "For this reason." And I triumphantly produced the magazine from the back of my trousers. And he said, "You little swine, how dare you do such a thing? It's a really cowardly thing to do. I won't have that in my house," and blah, blah, blah. And he stormed off to see the housemaster. And the housemaster, this man, Montgomery Woolley, who was a little prone to whiskey, came storming into the dormitory with his cane in his hand, just as I changed into my pajamas. And he was in a rage, towering rage. And he made me bend over the end of the bed, and he whacked me again at the end of the bed. Well, the next morning, I couldn't get my pajama bottoms off because they were stuck to my backside by blood, and it was rather a bad way. And I said to the other boys in the dormitory that I'd had enough, and I was leaving. I was going to go. And I was going to go that night, much to their excitement, by the way. And of course, when you say that kind of thing to other boys in your dormitory, you have to do it. So there was a question of having to follow through. So I collected money from them. I got 11 and sixpence for this 2,000-mile journey, a bottle of water, and a packet of Marie biscuits, unopened packet of Marie biscuits. And that night, after lights out, I crept out of the dormitory and across the school playing fields. But by a kind of accident, in a way, as I was in the most exposed possible position with my pillowcase full of Marie biscuits and a bottle of water and 11 and sixpence, who should drive into the school grounds but the headmaster? I could recognize his car, an old Mercedes. And I lay flat on the ground like a US Marine or something, and the headlights of the car swept over me and went by. I think he also was a little fond of the whiskey. But anyway, he didn't notice me lying there. And off I went on this long road. In the far distance, I could see the glow of Bulawayo in the sky, as I say, about 30 miles off. But what I wanted to do was to get to a little railway siding at a tiny little village called Essexvale, which is about 6 miles from the school. And so I trudged, and you can imagine, walking about sort of 2-3 miles an hour at that age, I suppose. It seemed an awfully long time. It was cold, and there were stirrings in the bush on either side of the road, but it was late at night, so it was all rather alarming. So when I heard the sound of an approaching bicycle, I was very, very pleased. And along came a bicycle with 2 young African men on it. And I stopped them and offered to buy their bicycle, because I thought this would be a bit of a help. And they were perfectly willing to sell it. They said, "How much for?" And I did a quick calculation. I had 11 and sixpence. It was 2,000 miles. I said, "Sixpence. I'll give you 6pence for the bike." They pondered for a moment, not for very long. They said, "No, not enough. But where do you want to go?" So I said, "Well, I need to get to the railway line." And they said, "We'll take you." And they put me on the crossbar of the bike. One rode, the other ran. Then they switched over. The other rode, and the first one ran. They took me this 5 or 6 miles to Essexvale and showed me a hut where I could sleep until the train came, because they said the train would be by at dawn. And they opened the door to the hut, and there were lots of people sleeping in this hut, and the air was rank with, the smell of sleepers and the sound of sleepers. And so, unfortunately for me, I didn't go in. Instead, I sat outside the hut, and I attacked my Marie biscuits and my bottle of water, and I sat and I waited for the train. And the hours went by, and the dawn still seemed a very long way away. And I was beginning to fall asleep sitting at the side of the hut when I noticed a little wavering pinprick of light, and it was a torch coming along the side of the railway track. And it got closer and closer, and behind the torch I could see the uniform of an askari, an African policeman. And the torch got closer and closer, and then the beam fell on me. Now, I was dressed in the only clothes I had, which was my school uniform. And the askari said to me, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going to the Copper Belt up in Zambia." And he said, "And where are you from?" And I said, "I'm from England." And there was a skeptical silence. And then he said, "I think you better come with me." And he took me along to the Boma, the little police station at this village, and he woke up the white policeman who was the officer in charge of this little village, and presented me to him. And he was very annoyed about being woken up, very annoyed, and also very annoyed to have to deal with a runaway schoolboy. And he rang the school, and about an hour later, my housemaster, Montgomery Woolley, and 2 prefects turned up from the school, a kind of honor guard, if you like, put me in the back of this car without speaking, drove me back to the school. And as I was being driven back to school, I thought to myself, well, what now? If I get caned for being late for prep and caned for having an untidy locker next to my bed, what's going to happen to me for having run away from school and being AWOL all night long? I thought a firing squad was probably the least of it. When we got back to the school, one of the prefects was my own dormitory prefect, and he said to me, "Stay in bed when rising bell goes, and don't leave bed until somebody comes for you." So I waited and waited, very apprehensively in bed. And he came back about an hour or so after all the other boys had gone off to school, and he said, "You must get dressed, and you must go and see the headmaster." Now, at that school, there were the junior boys and the senior boys and the prefects and the masters and the housemasters, and then there was God, and then there was the headmaster, whom we never saw from year to year. It was a terrifying presence, and I thought, oh my God, the headmaster. I mean, it would be one thing to deal with my housemaster. At least I knew what would happen if I saw him, namely I would get caned. But what would the headmaster do? You know, firing squad now seemed the least of my problems. So I was sent off to the headmaster's house, which was up in one part of the school. My knees quite literally knocking together because I didn't know what to expect at all. And I was shown into the headmaster's study. And the headmaster said, "Now, my dear boy, what is this all about?" And had I been smarter than I was then at the age of 13, I would have cottoned on to what the problem was with the headmaster, and I would have said to him, "Give me a cigarette, you bastard. I'm going to put my feet up on your desk, and I'm going to ask you, how much is it worth for you, for the school, for it not to be known that a boy ran away from the school for having been beaten so much?" You know, I could have milked him for years if I had the good sense. It would have been absolutely perfect. But the point was, with rather remote and unsympathetic parents who would have said to me, "Well, you got beaten so much, you must have deserved it," and not being a fly enough to recognize all the potentialities of blackmail, I didn't say that to him. I just said to him, "Oh, well, I've been caned rather a lot, and I got fed up, and so I ran away." And he said, "Oh, well, you don't have to worry about that. Not going to happen anymore this term, no more canings. We're going to sort something else out." And he was as placatory as he possibly could be. And I was puzzled for it for quite a long time. And it was only years later that I realized that he was more frightened than I was. And that if only I'd known, boy, wouldn't things be different now.